The acrid stench of his burned house was still in Daniel Clay's hair when she strutted into his cabin like she owned the place. He hadn't even unpacked his second duffel bag when the woman appeared, heels clicking against the cedar porch. Planks, red clipboard tucked under one arm like a sword. Her blazer was too stiff for the lakeside breeze, and her expression even stiffer. "Excuse me?" she said, not as a question, but a command. Daniel looked up from his toolkit, wiping a streak of dust off his cheek. "You need something?" "I need to see a permit," she said, stepping closer without waiting for an invitation. "This dock is non-conforming and obstructs the community lake view." He blinked once, twice. The scent of charred drywall was still lodged in his sinuses. Just 5 days ago, his house in Brookfield had gone up in smoke after an electrical panel sparked behind the walls. Investigators said it could have been worse. He could have been asleep. Instead, he had been on a grocery run, returned to black smoke pouring out the windows of the only home he'd known for 30 years. The lake cabin was never part of the plan. It was just something his Uncle Richie had left him in the will. A creaky, quiet place for fishing trips and broken cell signals. Daniel hadn't visited it in years. Now, it was home. "This dock's been here since 1978, he said calmly. "My uncle built it, before the HOA was even founded." The woman stiffened. "That may be, but as the acting president of the Lakeshore Heights Homeowners Association, I'm informing you that legacy status doesn't override current regulations. All homeowners must comply." Daniel stood slowly. At 6'2", with a retired firefighter's build and the quiet calm of someone who'd seen worse than a clipboard, he didn't need to raise his voice. "And you are?" "Karen Templeton," she said proudly, chin high. "HOA president." Of course, he thought. Her name had been on the bulletin board by the gate. There had been rumors about her even back then, strict about yard gnomes and color palettes, handed out citations like coupons. Still, he hadn't expected a visit on day one. "Well, Ms. Templeton," Daniel said, voice even, "I've got documents from the county that show this cabin is exempt from HOA oversight. Grandfathered in when the bylaws were written. I'll be happy to show you." Her nostrils flared. "I'll need to see those right away, and you'll still need to apply for visual compliance." "That camera on your porch?" She pointed to the motion sensor. "Against policy. No unauthorized surveillance devices." Daniel felt a flicker of annoyance. "That's for wildlife. There's been bears." Karen took out her phone and began snapping photos of the dock, the camera, even his muddy boots near the porch stairs. "You'll receive a citation in the mail," she said curtly. "Refusal to comply could result in fines, or even a lien on the property. Just a friendly warning." "Right," Daniel said dryly. "Super friendly." With a huff, Karen clicked back down the steps, her heels echoing like gavel strikes. That night, Daniel sat by the fireplace, staring at a half-unpacked box of kitchen tools. Outside, the lake glimmered under moonlight. It was peaceful. At least, it had been until the HOA president burst onto his property uninvited. He dug through his backpack and found the envelope his uncle had left him, the one with the exemption clause, stamped and sealed by the county recorder's office. He made 3 copies the next morning, one to be mailed to the HOA, one for his lawyer in the city, and one for his own records. At the local diner in town, he stopped for coffee and eggs. The waitress, a kind-eyed woman named Lacey, noticed the HOA paperwork. "New to Lakeshore?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Sort of. Inherited my uncle's cabin." She grimaced. "You meet Karen yet?" "Yesterday." "Marched right onto the porch." Lacey chuckled without humor. She did that to me last fall. Said my mailbox paint was too reflective. Filed a violation for hazardous gleam. Daniel shook his head, smiling despite himself. That bad? She's a rule book with lipstick, Lacey muttered. Half the neighborhood's scared of her. The other half already moved out. By the time he got back to the cabin, there was a red envelope taped to the door. Official notice. HOA citation. Number 771A. Unauthorized structures, surveillance equipment, and refusal to cooperate. 3 violations in 24 hours. Daniel exhaled, slow and steady. He'd faced backdrafts, collapsed stairwells, and families screaming for missing pets. This was paperwork. Still, something gnawed at him. The envelope wasn't sealed properly. The handwriting wasn't from the printed template. And worst of all, the footage from his porch camera, the one that auto-saved to his cloud account, had a gap. Between 3:24 and 3:29 a.m., the camera had been disabled. He reviewed the logs. No motion detected. No file corruption. Just silence. He looked at the still image of the porch just before the blackout. A figure at the edge of the frame. Curly hair, red blazer, holding something. Clipboard. Daniel rubbed his temples. What exactly had he inherited along with the dock and pine trees? It wasn't just an old cabin. It was a battleground. And he was about to learn the HOA wasn't playing by any rules he recognized. The acrid stench of his burned house was still in Daniel Clay's hair when she strutted into his cabin like she owned the place. He hadn't even unpacked his second duffel bag when the woman appeared, heels clicking against the cedar porch, planks, red clipboard tucked under one arm like a sword. Her blazer was too stiff for the lakeside breeze, and her expression even stiffer. "Excuse me?" she said, not as a question, but a command. Daniel looked up from his toolkit, wiping a streak of dust off his cheek. "You need something?" "I need to see a permit," she said, stepping closer without waiting for an invitation. "This dock is non-conforming and obstructs the community lake view." He blinked once, twice. The scent of charred drywall was still lodged in his sinuses. Just 5 days ago, his house in Brookfield had gone up in smoke after an electrical panel sparked behind the walls. Investigators said it could have been worse. He could have been asleep. Instead, he had been on a grocery run, returned to black smoke pouring out the windows of the only home he'd known for 30 years. The lake cabin was never part of the plan. It was just something his Uncle Richie had left him in the will. A creaky, quiet place for fishing trips and broken cell signals. Daniel hadn't visited it in years. Now, it was home. "This dock's been here since 1978, he said calmly. "My uncle built it, before the HOA was even founded." The woman stiffened. "That may be, but as the acting president of the Lakeshore Heights Homeowners Association, I'm informing you that legacy status doesn't override current regulations. All homeowners must comply." Daniel stood slowly. At 6'2", with a retired firefighter's build and the quiet calm of someone who'd seen worse than a clipboard, he didn't need to raise his voice. "And you are?" "Karen Templeton," she said proudly, chin high. "HOA president." Of course, he thought. Her name had been on the bulletin board by the gate. There had been rumors about her even back then, strict about yard gnomes and color palettes, handed out citations like coupons. Still, he hadn't expected a visit on day one. "Well, Ms. Templeton," Daniel said, voice even. "I've got documents from the county that show this cabin is exempt from HOA oversight. Grandfathered in when the bylaws were written. I'll be happy to show you." Her nostrils flared. "I'll need to see those right away." And you'll still need to apply for visual compliance. That camera on your porch? She pointed to the motion sensor. Against policy. No unauthorized surveillance devices. Daniel felt a flicker of annoyance. That's for wildlife. There's been bears. Karen took out her phone and began snapping photos. Of the dock, the camera, even his muddy boots near the porch stairs. You'll receive a citation in the mail, she said curtly. Refusal to comply could result in fines, or even a lien on the property. Just a friendly warning. Right, Daniel said dryly. Super friendly. With a huff, Karen clicked back down the steps, her heels echoing like gavel strikes. That night, Daniel sat by the fireplace, staring at a half-unpacked box of kitchen tools. Outside, the lake glimmered under moonlight. It was peaceful. At least, it had been until the HOA president burst onto his property uninvited. He dug through his backpack and found the envelope his uncle had left him, the one with the exemption clause, stamped and sealed by the county recorder's office. He made 3 copies the next morning, one to be mailed to the HOA, one for his lawyer in the city, and one for his own records. At the local diner in town, he stopped for coffee and eggs. The waitress, a kind-eyed woman named Lacey, noticed the HOA paperwork. New to Lakeshore? She asked. Daniel nodded. Sort of. Inherited my uncle's cabin. She grimaced. You meet Karen yet? Yesterday. Marched right onto the porch. Lacey chuckled without humor. She did that to me last fall. Said my mailbox paint was too reflective. Filed a violation for hazardous gleam. Daniel shook his head, smiling despite himself. That bad? She's a rule book with lipstick, Lacey muttered. Half the neighborhood's scared of her. The other half already moved out. By the time he got back to the cabin, there was a red envelope taped to the door. Official notice. HOA citation, number 771A. Unauthorized structures, surveillance equipment, and refusal to cooperate. 3 violations in 24 hours. Daniel exhaled, slow and steady. He'd faced backdrafts, collapsed stairwells, and families screaming for missing pets. This was paperwork. Still, something gnawed at him. The envelope wasn't sealed properly. The handwriting wasn't from the printed template. And, worst of all, the footage from his porch camera, the one that auto-saved to his cloud account, had a gap. Between 3:24 and 3:29 a.m., the camera had been disabled. He reviewed the logs. No motion detected. No file corruption. Just silence. He looked at the still image of the porch just before the blackout. A figure at the edge of the frame. Curly hair. Red blazer. Holding something. Clipboard. Daniel rubbed his temples. What exactly had he inherited along with the dock and pine trees? It wasn't just an old cabin, it was a battleground. And he was about to learn the HOA wasn't playing by any rules he recognized. The air was unusually still the next morning, as if the entire lake was holding its breath. Daniel Clay stood barefoot on the porch, sipping his second cup of coffee. His thoughts drifted between camera angles and encrypted backups. Last night, Marcia had stayed in the guest room, her phone buzzing non-stop with political aides requesting updates. But she silenced it all. This matters, she told him. This isn't just about you. It's about power being misused in plain sight. Daniel agreed, but neither of them expected what came next. At precisely 9:07 a.m., a familiar car rolled up the gravel path. It was Karen Templeton's white luxury SUV, its chrome grille flashing like teeth in the sun. Daniel's shoulders tensed as he watched, her step out, wearing the same red blazer as before, immaculate, pressed, and inappropriate for the outdoors. But this time, she wasn't alone. Two other HOA board members followed behind her. One, a thin man with a nervous mustache. The other, a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet clutched to her chest. Karen marched up the path like she was delivering a warrant. Daniel didn't move. "You have exactly 5 minutes to explain yourself," Karen announced, her voice slicing through the morning calm. "You failed to attend the compliance review meeting last night." "I wasn't invited," Daniel replied calmly. She scoffed. "The newsletter contained the date and time. It is every homeowner's responsibility to remain informed. Ignorance is no defense." He folded his arms. "I'm not under your jurisdiction. This cabin is grandfathered out of HOA control. I've already submitted copies of the exemption paperwork." Karen stepped onto the porch without asking. Her heels clicked once, then again. "We are not here to debate policy. We are here to conduct an inspection. You're not authorized to conduct anything on private property without consent." She turned to the woman with the tablet. "Log that he is obstructing a compliance walk-through." Daniel didn't budge. "Step off my porch." Karen's nostrils flared. "We're allowed to enter properties for HOA matters under Section 4B of the agreement." Daniel pulled a folded document from his back pocket. "And I'm exempt under Article 1A of the original plat. You're trespassing." Karen reached for the screen door handle. That's when the cabin door swung open from inside, and Marcia Langford appeared. She wore a navy sweater, her hair tied back casually, holding a mug of tea. But her expression was sharp, calm, and entirely unreadable. She glanced at Karen, then at the clipboard in her hand. Karen blinked. "You're a guest," Marcia said simply. "Staying for a few days. Then you're subject to HOA rules, including unauthorized lodging." Daniel took a step forward. "This is a private residence. She's my guest." Karen turned back toward Marcia. "Are you aware this property is in violation of multiple HOA regulations?" Marcia took a slow sip of her tea. "I'm aware you just stepped onto a resident's private porch without permission." Karen gave a tight smile. "We're empowered to do so in cases of active non-compliance." "No," Marcia said, stepping fully outside now. "You're empowered to notify, request, and mediate. What you're doing is called unlawful entry. If you step into this home, it becomes trespassing." The two board members shifted uncomfortably behind Karen. Karen's voice dropped. "I suggest you mind your tone. This is HOA business." Marcia gave a faint smile. "And I suggest you know who you're speaking to before you escalate." Karen tilted her head, confused. Marcia pulled a thin leather wallet from her back pocket and opened it, revealing the silver badge and laminated ID of the State Attorney General of the state. Karen's face drained of color. For a moment, no one said a word. The sound of distant gulls and wind through pine trees filled the silence. Marcia's tone didn't change. "You are currently in violation of Civil Code FRABR 601, unlawful entry onto private property under false authority. You've also threatened financial penalty without proper due process and falsified legal documents in at least 2 citations that I've reviewed." Karen blinked fast. I wasn't aware. You were—" "You shouldn't have to know who I am to follow the law," Marcia said coldly. The mustached board member took a quiet step back. The woman with the tablet lowered it slightly. Karen tried to recover. "This is all a misunderstanding. We have a procedure." Marcia's eyes narrowed. "Your procedure appears to ignore foundational legal rights. You've been threatening residents with financial ruin over fences, paint shades, and so-called surveillance violations. That ends today." Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Marcia continued, stepping slightly closer. "I'm opening a preliminary investigation into HOA abuse and unlawful enforcement activity. You will receive a formal notice. I suggest you retain an attorney." Karen stumbled back a step. Daniel stayed silent, watching the woman who had tried to fine him for his front camera now realize she'd picked a fight with the wrong person. After a moment of stunned silence, Karen turned to her board members. "Let's go," she muttered. They didn't argue. The three of them walked briskly down the steps, not bothering to make eye contact. Karen's heels caught once in the porch slats. She cursed under her breath. Daniel didn't say a word. The SUV pulled away with a squeal of gravel. Back inside, Daniel exhaled and shut the door. "Well," he said, "that was something." Marcia sat back down on the couch and took another sip of her now lukewarm tea. "She just gave us everything we need, on camera, on record." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You mean the doorbell cam?" She nodded. "And my body mic." Daniel blinked. "You're wearing a wire?" Marcia smiled. "I never travel without it. Too many campaign stops, too many risks. I wasn't sure I'd need it out here, but, well, guess it paid off." Daniel chuckled and sat beside her. "I've seen buildings collapse in flames, but I've never seen someone fall apart that fast, without a single match." Marcia leaned her head back against the couch cushion. The thing about people like her, they build their kingdom out of fear and silence. All it takes is one witness with a voice loud enough, and the whole thing comes down. Outside, the wind rustled the trees again. This time, it sounded like relief. The town buzzed quietly the next morning, as though the pine trees themselves were whispering about what had happened at the lake. Karen Templeton had stormed onto a resident's property, barked citations at a former firefighter, and tried to trespass into a lake cabin, only to realize she'd done it all in front of the state attorney general. And now, for the first time in years, she had gone silent. Inside the cabin, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, leafing through decades of HOA newsletters his uncle had kept stacked in a plastic storage bin. Some were laughable. Warnings about mailbox colors, citations for decorative birdhouses. But others struck a darker chord. 4 separate mentions of foreclosures. Multiple accounts of emergency HOA meetings held without public notice. A list of fines levied on Lot 7C, $4,700 over the course of a single year for issues like non-regulation porch lights and improperly stored kayak. Daniel circled each one in red. Marcia, seated across from him, sipped her coffee and scrolled through. HOA meeting minutes downloaded from the public archive. "She's been slowly tightening the noose," she murmured, "using the HOA charter like a weapon. Subtle at first, then systemic." "Legal?" Daniel asked. "Some of it. But she's crossed several lines. The citations are poorly written. She's imposed fines without hearings. That's coercive. And if she tampered with your security system—" Daniel nodded. Still no explanation for that gap in the footage. "We'll get it. But we need to build a pattern. Not just your case, others too." So they got to work. Daniel drove from door to door, introducing himself with a warm handshake and a quiet question. "Have you had any trouble with the HOA lately?" The first few neighbors hesitated. Then the stories began. The Bakers. Lottie A. Karen fined them $300 for a wind chime she claimed disrupted community peace. Mrs. Lynn, Lot 8B, received 5 notices in 1 month for porch clutter. It was her husband's wheelchair ramp. The Ortegas, Lot 3C, Karen threatened lien proceedings after their son parked a college car with a cracked taillight in the driveway. They had all paid up, afraid of legal action. One family had even sold their home, unable to keep up with escalating fines and mounting pressure. Marcia documented everything. They printed statements, copied letters, recorded new witness testimonies. Every signature was voluntary. Every voice came with a sigh of relief. By dusk, they had compiled 23 formal complaints. Not guesses, not gossip, evidence. That night, Daniel sat on the porch, flipping through the folder of collected documents. "It's worse than I thought," he said. "This isn't a power trip. It's a campaign." Marcia leaned against the railing beside him. "She's built a system where people are afraid to speak. That's how this kind of control works. Intimidation wrapped in policy." "Think we have enough to shut her down?" "Almost. But we still need one thing." "What's that?" "A direct link between Karen and HOA financial records. If she's profiting from this, using the fines to pay for personal expenses or funnel money into private accounts, it becomes a criminal case." Daniel frowned. "Wouldn't that be in the board's meeting notes?" "Not if she's hiding it. But if we can get someone on the board to talk." Daniel remembered the woman with the tablet, the one who'd looked like she wanted to be anywhere else during Karen's porch drama. "I might know who to ask." The next day, Daniel invited Ruth Halstead, board secretary and longtime resident, to coffee at the Lakeside Cafe. She arrived cautiously, glancing over her shoulder twice before sitting down. "I know who your guest is," she said quietly. Daniel smiled gently. "That's not why I asked you here." Ruth gave a sad smile. "Then you're smarter than most. What do you want?" "I want to know how long this has been going on." Ruth exhaled. "Since Karen was elected. The first few months were normal. Petty fines, passive-aggressive emails. Then she started emergency meetings, changed bylaws without community, votes, blocked people from attending hearings. And when we questioned her—" "She retaliated?" Daniel asked. Ruth nodded. "I found citations on my door the next day. Said my lawn had shade inconsistencies." "I don't even know what that means." "Do you have copies of anything? Emails, financials, anything unusual?" Ruth looked around, then opened her purse and slid a flash drive across the table. "I started archiving everything 6 months ago," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do with it. But now—" Daniel's eyes softened. "You did the right thing." Back at the cabin, Marcia plugged in the drive. What they found was damning. Dozens of irregular transfers. Overdraft fees covered with newly collected fines, HOA funds paying for boutique furniture, high-end office chairs, and even plane tickets labeled as conference travel, but booked to Miami. "This," Marcia said, eyes narrowing, "is felony misuse of HOA funds." She picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. "Activate a formal review under Municipal Code Enforcement. We're initiating state oversight for the Lakeshore Heights Homeowners Association. I want Karen Templeton notified within 48 hours." She hung up and turned to Daniel. "You ready for this?" He nodded. "She brought the fight to my door. I just didn't know it was everyone's fight." That evening, Daniel nailed a fresh sign to the edge of his dock. "No trespassing, private property. Monitored 24/7. It wasn't just a warning. It was a message. Karen Templeton's reign of unchecked power was coming to an end, and this time, the clipboard wouldn't save her. The storm arrived just after sunset. Sheets of rain lashed the lake like a whip. Wind howled through the trees, and the thunder rolled so long and low, it felt like the ground itself was growling. But inside Daniel Clay's cabin, the fire crackled. The windows held steady, and the tension building over weeks finally began to shift. Daniel had set out a pot of chili on the stove. Marcia Langford, the state attorney general herself, sat on the floor, barefoot, scanning printouts of HOA financial statements with two of her investigators, Tia Perez and Nathan Connors, both of whom had arrived just hours earlier under the cover of stormy skies and quiet roads. "Everything checks out," Tia said, tapping her laptop. "Karen Templeton has been using HOA funds for personal expenses for at least 14 months. That includes airfare, designer furniture, and multiple payments to a consulting firm registered to her cousin's name." Nathan added, "And the fake citations? Classic case of targeted harassment. We have over 24 resident statements now, all consistent." Daniel stirred the chili in the pot. "So what happens next?" Marcia stood, stretching slightly. "We hand this off to the Municipal Oversight Committee, file for temporary control of the HOA under the Emergency Mismanagement Clause, and begin the investigation." She glanced toward the front door. "If she's smart, she'll step down before it gets to court." Daniel met her eyes. "And if she's not?" "She'll come here." The lights flickered once, then again. Then everything went black. For a second, no one moved. Then the emergency lights Marcia had brought, small battery-powered lanterns, flared on, casting the room in a soft glow. "I rigged a backup battery system," Daniel said. "It'll keep the camera feeds running and alert me if anything moves outside." Just then, there was a soft ping from the laptop. Nathan looked up. Motion at the east side of the cabin. Tia tapped a few keys. The porch camera activated. And there she was. Umbrella turned inside out, soaked blazer clinging to her shoulders, clipboard somehow still in hand. Karen Templeton, storm or not, had arrived. She didn't knock. She kicked. The wooden door shuddered from the impact. She kicked again. Then she opened it like she owned it. Daniel stood first. Marcia didn't move. Rain poured behind Karen in silver sheets. Her eyeliner ran. Her voice was sharp, shrill, and soaked in fury. "You are harboring state agents on private property without HOA clearance," she yelled, stepping inside. Nathan lifted his phone. "Recording!" Karen pointed a trembling, rain-slicked finger at Daniel. "You have no right to conduct unauthorized gatherings. You're creating a security risk. This storm has the whole neighborhood on edge, and here you are, playing lawyer with—" Her eyes landed on Marcia. "With this woman, who keeps interfering with official matters." Marcia stood slowly, calm as stone. "You just kicked open a front door. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Karen jabbed her clipboard toward her. "You're not a resident. You don't get to lecture me on policy." "No," Marcia said, stepping forward, her voice low and thunderous. "But as the state attorney general, I absolutely get to lecture you on criminal behavior." Karen stopped mid-breath. Marcia continued, voice like a blade. "You've trespassed. You've falsified documents. You've misused public funds. And now you've forced entry into a private home. Again. You've done all of this under the banner of an HOA that doesn't even legally govern this property." Karen took one step back. Then two. "This is a setup," she whispered. Marcia gestured to the camera feed on the laptop, which still showed Karen in real time. "This is evidence." Karen's hand went slack. The clipboard dropped with a soaked thud on the hardwood floor. "Ipo didn't know," she said quietly. "You didn't care," Marcia replied. "That's worse." For a moment, the cabin fell completely silent. Except for the fire's crackle and the storm's howl outside, Then, a car engine could be heard. From down the drive, headlights flashed through the fogged windows. Daniel looked outside. It's the sheriff. Deputy Carolyn Rhodes, a strong but steady woman in her 50s, stepped through the front door, her coat dripping. We received a report of forced entry. Someone heard yelling over the storm. Marcia turned to her. "Deputy, you're just in time," Karen's voice cracked. "This isn't what it looks like." Deputy Rhodes didn't flinch. "You kicked in the door, ma'am?" "It was open." "It was locked," Daniel said calmly. "I heard the latch snap." Marcia approached the deputy and handed her a folder. "State AG office. Here's our case file. We'll be filing charges. Tonight's events just made this official." Karen collapsed into a nearby chair, soaked and silent, staring at the fire as if seeing it for the first time. Outside, the storm began to wane. Rain turned to drizzle. The lake, once rippling with fury, softened. Inside, the investigation moved forward. Karen was escorted out, not in handcuffs, yet, but under formal detainment pending review. Deputy Rhodes promised to file the necessary paperwork and hold her for questioning. As the SUV disappeared down the gravel road, Daniel turned to Marcia. "She'll try to spin it." "She can try," Marcia said, "but she's not spinning out of this one." Tia and Nathan began packing up the evidence, now catalogued and sealed. Daniel locked the new bolt on his door, and then, at last, he sat down again beside the fire. No clipboard. No citations. No threats. Just peace. Later that night, Daniel stood on the porch again, watching fog roll over the lake. Marcia joined him quietly, holding a fresh mug of tea. "Think it's over?" he asked. "No," she said. "But the hard part is, you sure?" she smiled. "Karen's not your problem anymore. She's mine." They both chuckled softly. Then, as the clouds parted and the moonlight kissed the water, Daniel realized something. He wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. He was standing for every neighbor too afraid to speak. Every family who paid fines they didn't owe. Every person who gave up their peace for the sake of quiet. And now, finally, they had their voice back. Karen Templeton always saw herself as untouchable. She was the woman who'd replaced community barbecues with policy meetings, who made seniors repaint their garden benches because the wood didn't match the HOA color chart she had built. Her rule book like a fortress. One clause, one citation, one forced apology at a time. But now she sat alone in a windowless room at the Millwood Municipal Center, her hair still damp from the storm, her clipboard confiscated, her phone sealed. In an evidence bag, and the fortress? It was crumbling. Back at the cabin, Marcia Langford and her investigators spent the morning assembling the formal case package. Over 70 pages of documentation, 34 witness statements, 17 falsified violation notices, and 6 documented financial irregularities directly tied to Karen's personal expenses. Tia printed the final page and clipped it neatly into the binder. Ready for municipal review, Daniel stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the rain dissolve into a soft drizzle. "What happens now?" Marcia glanced at the clock. "We're delivering this to the county commissioner's office at noon. If they accept it, which they will, a judge can issue a protective order barring Karen from holding any HOA-related authority until the investigation concludes." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And the board?" Marcia sighed. "They'll be offered a chance to cooperate. Most of them were manipulated or intimidated into compliance. If they cooperate, they'll stay. If they resist, they go down with her." That afternoon, as news spread through the neighborhood, something unexpected happened. One by one, Lakeshore Heights residents began walking up Daniel's gravel drive. Some with folded papers in hand, some with nothing but stories. Mrs. Lynn arrived first, holding the shredded citations she had once paid in fear. Then came the Bakers, carrying screenshots of threatening emails. Then a retired schoolteacher. Then a young couple who had almost lost their home over a backyard grill. Marcia stepped outside and stood on the porch with Daniel, watching the growing crowd gather around the steps. "We never knew we weren't alone," one neighbor said. "She made us feel like we were breaking rules just by living here," another added. Daniel glanced at Marcia. "Want to say something?" She shook her head. "This is your place, your porch." He nodded, then stepped forward. "I didn't ask for a fight," Daniel said, voice steady. "I just came here to breathe, to heal." But she turned this into a battlefield. A murmur ran through the group. But I realized something. If we let people like her run things unchecked, they don't stop at the rules. They rewrite them. And the only way to stop that is by standing up, together. There was a pause. Then, applause. Not loud, not frenzied, but real, honest, free. At the same hour, back at the HOA headquarters, a small beige building with peeling, trim and a brass plaque that read Lakeshore Heights Community Center. A private emergency board meeting was underway, or rather, it was supposed to be, but only 2 members showed up. Ruth Halstead, the secretary, stood with her hands behind her back as an official from the Municipal Oversight Division read out the order suspending Karen Templeton from all HOA activities, pending formal inquiry. She is not to contact board members, access files, or issue directives of any kind, the official said. Any breach of this order is a criminal offense. The other board member, Charles, a mild-mannered retiree who once oversaw the community garden, simply nodded. "It's about time," he muttered. Ruth handed over her flash drive. "This contains all the archived meeting logs and internal emails. I kept everything." The official looked surprised. "Why did you?" She smiled. "Because deep down, I always knew this would end." Karen returned home that evening in silence. Her inbox overflowed with resignation demands. The HOA group chat she once dominated had gone quiet. Even her neighbors, those who once feared her, walked by her house without so much as a glance. And when she tried to open the HOA digital dashboard, she was locked out. Access revoked. Control severed. The clipboard she once carried like a crown sat in her garage now, damp, curling at the corners, stained with muddy footprints from the previous night. For the first time in years, Karen Templeton had no audience, and she didn't know who she was without one. Meanwhile, back at the lake, the mood had shifted. Children played on docks without citations. Porch lights twinkled in mismatched tones. Residents painted fences in colors they actually liked. And laughter, the kind that wasn't measured in decibels or restricted by bylaws, echoed through the trees. Daniel stood at the edge of his dock. That evening, skipping stones across the water as the sun dipped low. Marcia joined him, arms folded, gaze far away. "She'll lawyer up," she said. "Try to delay the investigation. Maybe even spin the press." "I figured," Daniel said. "You ready for that?" "I was born ready." They both smiled. Then Daniel asked the question that had been gnawing at him since it all began. How did she get so much power? Marcia paused. "We gave it to her. One silent neighbor at a time. One rule unchallenged. One meeting skipped. That's how people like her win." "And how do they lose?" She looked out at the lake. Like this. As twilight settled, porch lights began to glow along the lakeshore. Not uniform, not standard, but each one different. Soft orange bulbs, bright whites, even a few festive strings that had long been forbidden under Karen's rule. The community had stopped hiding, stopped fearing. And as they did, Lakeshore Heights became something it hadn't been in years. A neighborhood. 1 month after the storm, the lake was still again. No HOA flyers fluttered on bulletin boards. No clipped-heel footsteps echoed down the gravel paths. And no red-enveloped violations were tucked into screen doors at dawn. Karen Templeton was gone. Removed from her role as HOA president by unanimous vote from the remaining board members, suspended pending legal review by the Municipal Oversight Committee, and now facing civil penalties for misusing community funds and abuse of office. The clipboard had been replaced by a gavel, and the person holding it wasn't her. Daniel Clay sat on the edge of his porch, sun dipping into the lake horizon, the warmth of August curling around his boots. Beside him, Baxter, the neighbor's retriever, snoozed peacefully. On the table, a cold glass of iced tea, a stack of community petitions, and the newest official letter, confirming the dissolution of Lakeshore Heights HOA under state intervention. In its place, a volunteer-based neighborhood committee. Transparent, accountable, human. Daniel had been asked to chair it. He politely declined. "I just want to enjoy my porch," he'd said, "but I'll help where I can." And that's exactly what he did. Marcia Langford returned the following weekend, not as a guest this time, but as a speaker. The state attorney general, once hiding out for a weekend of peace, now stood at a community gathering in a folding chair circle under the pine trees, thanking neighbors for their courage. She never once mentioned her title. Instead, she said, "This place reminded me that power doesn't belong in a binder. It belongs in the people. In the quiet ones who stand up when they don't have to. In those who say no when it's easier to nod and pay the fine." Applause broke out. Not loud, but deep. Honest. Daniel stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching the same neighbors who used to whisper now laugh out loud and shake hands freely. That was all he ever wanted. Across the lake, Karen's old house sat quiet. Her car was gone. Her name scrubbed from the mailbox. Her chair at the board table had been dismantled. Rumor had it she left town, took a job in a neighboring city with a condo association. Some said she tried to start a new HOA before anyone realized who she was. But Lakeshore had healed, and it had remembered something important. You can't build a community on fear and call it order. You can't silence people with fines and call it harmony. You can't trespass into someone's life and expect no one to push back. Weeks passed, then months. Porch swings were painted. Barbecues came back. The community garden flourished under the care of Henry and 2 teens who used to mow lawns just to avoid citations. People called it the Great Return, and Daniel's cabin, once the flashpoint of confrontation, became something else, a gathering place, a starting point, and, sometimes, a symbol. One crisp October morning, a local reporter visited to write a piece about grassroots justice. She asked Daniel, "What would you say started all this?" He paused, looked at the dock, the trees, the chipped mug in his hand. Then he smiled and said, "She walked into my cabin thinking I was just some guy with no idea how the rules worked. She didn't know the state attorney general was drinking tea behind the curtain. She didn't know we all had limits. And she didn't know. She'd just walked into her reckoning." On the cabin wall, Daniel framed something. It wasn't Karen's violation notice. It wasn't a news clipping. It was a handwritten note from Marcia, scribbled on the back of a diner napkin the day she left. When someone breaks into your peace, don't just rebuild what was. Build what should have always been. ML that night, as the stars blinked above the lake and cicadas hummed in the tall grass, Daniel stood on his dock, barefoot, the water cool beneath his toes. No sirens, no threats, no fear. Just the hum of a town that had remembered how to breathe. And the cabin door behind him, still open, but only to those who knock.